Jake Murphy pushed his mop bucket down the pristine corridors of the Galactic Military Academy, whistling an old Earth tune that nobody else in the galaxy would recognize. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was cleaning floors in the most prestigious military institution in known space while wearing a janitor's uniform that had seen better decades. "Excuse me, human," snorted Commander Vextil, a 7-foot-tall reptilian with more attitude than brain cells. "You missed a spot near the trophy case." Jake looked up with the practiced expression of someone who had perfected the art of appearing harmlessly dim. "Oh, sorry sir, I'll get right on that." He shuffled over to the already spotless floor, making a show of scrubbing absolutely nothing while Vextil strutted away, tail swishing with self-importance. The thing about being invisible was that people said the most interesting things around you. Take right now, for instance. A group of Zentarian cadets were discussing their upcoming tactical simulation, completely oblivious to the fact that their cleaning staff was mentally cataloging every strategic flaw in their plan. If these kids ever faced real combat, they'd last about as long as a snowball in a plasma reactor. "The key is to establish a perimeter here," one cadet was saying, pointing to a holographic display, "and then advance in formation." Jake suppressed a snort. That formation would get them all killed in the first 30 seconds. Any competent enemy would flank them through the obvious blind spot on the eastern approach. But what did he know? He was just the janitor. Professor Kethran, a blue-skinned academic who had never seen actual combat, waddled past carrying a stack of theoretical warfare textbooks. "Murphy," he barked without looking up, "the waste receptacles in Lecture Hall 7 need emptying." "Yes sir, Professor Kethran," Jake replied with just the right amount of deference. He'd learned that acting slightly slower than he actually was kept people from asking uncomfortable questions. Amazing how a mop and bucket could make someone completely invisible to the intellectual elite of the galaxy. As he made his way to the lecture hall, Jake's practiced eye automatically noted the security weaknesses in the academy's layout. 3 blind spots in the main corridor, emergency exits that could be easily compromised. Guard rotations that followed predictable patterns. Old habits died hard, even when you were trying your best to kill them. He'd been working here for 2 years now, and it had been the most peaceful 2 years of his adult life. No mission briefings at dark 30, no calling in airstrikes on his own position. No watching good people die because some politician thought a piece of rock in space was worth bleeding for. Just him, his mop, and the blissful ignorance of everyone around him who assumed that humans were only good for menial labor. If they only knew that their simple janitor had more confirmed kills than their entire faculty combined, well, that might make the staff meetings a bit more interesting. But they didn't know, and Jake intended to keep it that way. Jake was in the middle of explaining to a particularly stubborn stain why it needed to relocate when disaster struck in the form of Cadet Zara Velenith. The young Altarian was rushing to class, arms full of datapads and what looked like a half-eaten protein bar, when she collided with Jake's mop bucket like it had personally insulted her ancestors. Water went everywhere. Zara went down in a tangle of limbs and academic materials, and Jake, in a moment of instinct that he immediately regretted, moved to catch her before she could crack her skull on the marble floor. The problem with heroic reflexes is that they tend to blow your cover. "Whoa there, cadet," Jake said, steadying her with hands that moved just a little too quickly, positioned just a little too precisely. "You okay?" Zara blinked up at him, startled by the concern in his voice. Most staff barely acknowledged cadets existed unless they were screwing up. But as she regained her footing, her sharp eyes caught something that made her freeze. Jake's collar had shifted during the rescue attempt, revealing just a glimpse of black ink on his neck. It was only visible for a second before he automatically adjusted his uniform, but Zara had excellent eyesight and an even better memory for military history. "That tattoo," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What tattoo?" Jake replied, busying himself with soaking up the spilled water. "Don't see any tattoos here, just a janitor who needs to invest in a better mop bucket." But Zara wasn't buying it. She'd spent countless hours studying military insignia for her advanced warfare history class. That symbol, that specific design of a skull with crossed rifles beneath a nebula pattern, that was the mark of the Ghost Battalion. The most classified, most legendary special forces unit in human military history. The same unit that had supposedly been disbanded 15 years ago, after Operation Darkstar. The mission so classified that even the classification was classified. "You're him," she breathed, staring at Jake like he'd just sprouted wings. "You're one of them. The ghosts." Jake's hands stilled for just a moment, the only sign that her words had hit their mark. Then he resumed cleaning with the methodical patience of someone who had perfected the art of deflection. "Kid, I think you've been hitting the study stims a little too hard," he said with a chuckle that sounded almost genuine. I'm just a janitor. Been mopping floors since before you were out of diapers. Ghost Battalion was real, Zara pressed, lowering her voice. They say you guys could infiltrate anywhere, eliminate any target, disappear without a trace. They say you ended the Kepler Rebellion with just 12 soldiers. They say a lot of things, Jake replied, wringing out his mop with deliberate care. They also say that Zentarian food won't kill you, but I've seen the evidence to the contrary in too many trash bins. Zara watched him work, her mind racing. The way he moved, economical and precise. The way his eyes constantly scanned the corridor, cataloging threats that weren't there. The way he'd caught her, positioning his body to shield her from impact without even thinking about it. Why are you here? She asked finally. Jake looked up at her then, and for just a moment she saw something flicker behind his carefully constructed mask of mediocrity. Something tired and old and maybe a little sad. Same reason as everyone else, cadet, he said, trying to make an honest living. But as he pushed his cart away, whistling that same unrecognizable tune, Zara noticed something else. His posture had changed, just slightly. The shuffle was gone, replaced by the predatory grace of someone who had learned to move silently through hostile territory. Someone was watching the watcher, and for the first time in 2 years, Jake Murphy felt the familiar weight of a secret that might not stay buried much longer. 3 days later, Jake was contemplating the philosophical implications of a particularly stubborn scuff mark when the first explosion rocked the Academy's north wing. The lights flickered. Emergency klaxons started wailing like dying space whales, and somewhere in the distance someone was screaming in what sounded like 17 different languages simultaneously. Well, Jake muttered to his mop, that's new. The Academy's state-of-the-art defense systems had apparently chosen this exact moment to demonstrate why you shouldn't buy military equipment from the lowest bidder. Instead of the coordinated response that 2 centuries of military tradition should have produced, what Jake witnessed was a masterclass in how not to handle a crisis. Commander Vextel came charging down the corridor, his scales practically glowing with panic. All students to the secure bunkers, he bellowed, running in the opposite direction of said bunkers. Behind him, a stream of faculty members fled like their tails were on fire, which, given the smoke now billowing through the air vents, might actually have been the case. Through the massive transparisteel windows, Jake could see the attackers clearly. Marauder-class assault ships, at least a dozen of them, configured for boarding operations. Professional job, well coordinated, probably hegemony military contractors based on their formation patterns. The kind of people who got paid very well to make problems disappear permanently. This is not a drill. Professor Catherine's voice crackled over the intercom, the blue-skinned academic's usual pompous tone replaced by barely controlled hysteria. All personnel evacuate to designated safety zones immediately. I repeat, this is not a drill. Jake leaned on his mop handle and watched as the Academy's security forces scrambled to respond. It was like watching children play dress-up with military uniforms. They had the equipment, they had the training manuals, but they clearly had never faced anyone who actually knew what they were doing. The first wave of boarders had already breached the outer perimeter. Jake could track their progress by the sound of weapons fire and the screaming. Standard breach and clear tactics, moving with the kind of precision that suggested expensive mercenaries rather than common pirates. A group of terrified cadets ran past him, including young Zara, who shot him a look that clearly said, "Aren't you going to do something?" Jake gave her his best and just a simple janitor shrug, and continued mopping the same spot he'd been working on for the past 5 minutes. The second explosion was much closer, somewhere in the East Wing. The Academy's defensive turrets were firing now, but their targeting systems were clearly having issues. Instead of coordinated fields of fire, they were spraying plasma bolts in random directions like a drunk Centaurian at a shooting gallery. Security teams to the main plaza, came another announcement, this one from someone Jake didn't recognize. Hostiles have breached levels 3 through 7. All cadets maintain shelter protocols. Through his earpiece, which definitely wasn't standard janitorial equipment, Jake could hear the chatter from the Academy's security forces. It painted a picture that was both predictable and depressing. Half their teams were pinned down, the other half were lost, and their commanding officers were apparently having a collective nervous breakdown. The professional in Jake cataloged the tactical situation automatically. The attackers had isolated the Academy's defensive systems, neutralized their communications, and were systematically clearing each sector. Classic military operation, probably designed to capture rather than kill, which meant they wanted something specific. The question was what? Jake continued his methodical mopping as another group of panicked faculty members rushed past, including Dean Morthak, whose usual air of academic superiority had been replaced by the kind of terror that comes from realizing that theoretical knowledge doesn't stop actual bullets. The archives. The dean was gasping to his aide. They're heading for the strategic archives. If they get access to our tactical databases. Ah, that explained it. The Galactic Military Academy housed the most comprehensive collection of military strategy and technology in known space. In the wrong hands, that information could shift the balance of power across entire sectors. The third explosion shattered the windows at the end of the corridor, showering the hallway with transparent steel fragments. Jake watched a piece slice through the air exactly where his head would have been if he hadn't unconsciously shifted position at just the right moment. Old habits really did die hard. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an ominous red glow that made the smoke-filled corridors look like something out of a war zone, which Jake supposed they technically were now. The sound of weapons fire was getting closer. Heavy plasma rifles, military grade, the kind that could punch through standard academy armor like paper. These weren't pirates or raiders looking for quick profit. This was a military operation with serious backing and serious objectives. Jake wrung out his mop with the same deliberate care he'd shown every day for 2 years, even as the Academy's world crumbled around him. Just a simple janitor, doing his simple job, while chaos reigned and people died. The irony was almost poetic. Jake might have continued his performance indefinitely, content to let the Academy's problems remain exactly that, if not for the sound that cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. A child's scream, high and terrified, coming from the direction of the junior cadet dormitories. The first-year cadets, barely 16 years old, hadn't made it to the bunkers. Jake's mop hit the floor with a wet slap that echoed through the smoke-filled corridor. For 2 years he'd been Jake Murphy, humble janitor, but some instincts run deeper than cover identities, and the sound of kids in danger had just awakened something that had been sleeping for a very long time. Well, crap, he muttered, reaching into his janitor's cart with practiced efficiency. What came out wasn't standard cleaning equipment. The window cleaner spray bottle contained military-grade acid that could eat through hull plating in under 30 seconds. The floor polish was actually plastic explosive, stable until activated by a specific electromagnetic frequency that Jake could trigger from his tablet. The disinfectant was a concentrated nerve agent that could incapacitate an entire squad through skin contact alone. And that innocent-looking scrub brush. It housed enough surveillance and communication tech to coordinate a battalion-sized operation across 3-star systems. Jake's entire demeanor shifted like a switch being flipped. The shuffling gait disappeared, replaced by the fluid movement of someone who had learned to navigate urban warfare zones where every shadow could hide death. His shoulders straightened, his posture shifting from the defeated slouch of a working-class human to the predatory grace of an apex predator. His eyes, previously dull and unfocused behind cheap glasses, now scanned the environment with the kind of tactical awareness that had kept him alive through 17 major combat operations. The earpiece that had been passively monitoring Academy security chatter suddenly crackled to life with Jake's own voice, calm and professional despite the chaos around him. Attention all remaining security personnel. This is Ghost Actual assuming operational command. All units acknowledge and report status. The response was immediate confusion mixed with desperation. Who is this? Ghost Actual. That's not a recognized call sign in our system. Security Chief Nalteth, Jake interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of making life and death decisions under pressure. You currently have hostile forces moving through sections C through F using standard breach and clear tactics. Your defensive teams are scattered across 7 different locations with no unified command structure. Your communications are compromised, your automated defenses are offline, and you're approximately 8 minutes away from losing the strategic archives to what appears to be a professionally coordinated military extraction operation. Do you want to continue arguing about call signs, or do you want to save your academy? A pause filled with the distant sound of weapons fire. Then grudgingly, what do you need? Jake was already moving, his janitor's cart transformed into a mobile command center as he pulled out equipment that definitely wasn't available at any civilian supply store. A military-grade tactical tablet materialized from beneath what had appeared to be spare cleaning rags. A compact but sophisticated communication array emerged from the cart's hidden compartments, and from the very bottom, wrapped in what looked like dirty towels, came a weapon that hadn't been seen outside of classified Ghost Battalion operations. I need real-time surveillance feeds from all remaining security cameras, Jake said, his fingers flying across the tactical display as he pulled up building schematics that were far more detailed than anything in the Academy's public database. I need your remaining teams to establish a defensive perimeter around the main archive entrance, but I need them to avoid direct engagement with the hostiles. These aren't pirates or common raiders. They're military contractors, probably hegemony trained, and your people are going to get slaughtered if they try to go toe-to-toe with professionals. Slow them down. These mercenaries have already killed 6 of my people. Chief, I've been monitoring your security responses for the past 23 minutes. Your people are brave, but they're academy trained for ceremonial duties and theoretical scenarios. The hostiles are using live-fire combat tactics that your teams have never encountered outside of textbooks. Trust me when I say you don't want them engaging directly. Just buy me time and keep them from reaching the secondary archive servers. Jake reached the dormitory wing as the first mercenary team rounded the corner at the far end of the hallway. 3 soldiers, moving in textbook formation with the kind of professional coordination that spoke of years working together. They wore unmarked combat armor, carried military-grade plasma rifles, and moved with the confidence of people who had done this exact job dozens of times before. They were advancing on a group of terrified first-year cadets who had taken shelter behind an overturned study desk. The furniture might have been adequate protection against academy training weapons, but it would barely slow down military-grade plasma bolts for more than a few seconds. The mercenaries never saw him coming. Jake moved like liquid shadow, utilizing every piece of cover the corridor offered. Years of combat experience had taught him to read the micro-movements that telegraphed where trained soldiers would look, when they would scan their surroundings, how their attention would focus during a methodical advance. He flowed through their blind spots like he was dancing to music only he could hear. The rear guard went down first. Jake materialized behind him with the kind of silence that had made the Ghost Battalion legendary across 17 different war zones. The soldier, a veteran who had survived operations on hostile worlds from here to the Outer Rim, never even knew he was in danger. Jake's arm locked around his throat in a blood choke that cut off circulation to the brain without crushing the windpipe. No noise, no struggle, just a professional going to sleep for the next hour or two. The second mercenary, a woman with the kind of augmented reflexes that suggested military-grade neural implants, sensed something was wrong and started to turn. She managed to rotate about 90 degrees before Jake's improvised weapon, a sharpened floor buffer attachment that had been chemically treated to punch through standard combat armor, found the gap between her helmet and chest plate. The neural feedback from her severed spinal cord dropped her instantly. The third mercenary, a seasoned professional who wore the kind of scars that come from surviving encounters with people exactly like Jake, spun around with impressive speed and training. His weapon came up in a smooth arc, finger already tightening on the trigger. His tactical computer had identified the threat, calculated firing solutions, and was already compensating for target movement. He almost got the shot off, almost. Jake's hand closed around the barrel of the plasma rifle, redirecting it just enough that the bolt scorched the wall instead of his chest. His other hand, moving with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory drilled into him through years of close-quarters combat training, found the pressure point at the base of the mercenary's skull. The soldier dropped like a puppet with cut strings. "Stay down, and stay quiet," Jake told the cadets as he zip-tied the unconscious soldiers with industrial-strength cleaning ties that could probably hold a Zentorian battle rhino. "This isn't over yet." Young Zara stared at him with wide eyes that held equal parts terror and awe. "I knew it. I knew you weren't just a janitor. You're really one of them, aren't you? The Ghost Battalion. Kid, right now I need you to get these cadets to the secure bunkers through the maintenance corridors. Avoid the main hallways. Can you do that?" She nodded, but before she could move, Jake's earpiece crackled again. "Ghost Actual, we've got a major problem. Main assault team just breached the archive entrance. Our defensive line, it didn't hold. They cut through our people like they weren't even there." Jake closed his eyes for a moment, ran the tactical situation through his head with the kind of rapid analysis that had kept him alive through operations that existed only in classified files, and came to an unpleasant but inevitable conclusion. The mercenaries had achieved their primary objective. In approximately 10 minutes, they would have downloaded and copied every piece of strategic intelligence the Academy possessed. Military deployment schedules, defensive installations, fleet positions, technological specifications, that could shift the balance of power across entire sectors. Then they would disappear into hyperspace, before any real military response could arrive. Unless someone stopped them. "All units, fall back to secondary defensive positions," Jake ordered, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made people follow orders even when they didn't understand them. "Do not pursue the hostiles. I repeat, do not attempt to engage. Fall back and establish a perimeter around the civilian evacuation zones." "What are you going to do?" Zara asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. Jake looked at her, and for the first time in 2 years he smiled. It wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. It was the kind of smile that had given nightmares to enemy commanders across 3 different star clusters. "I'm going to go have a conversation with some uninvited guests about the proper etiquette for visiting educational institutions." He reached into his cart one more time and pulled out what looked like a standard maintenance tablet. A few taps on the screen, and suddenly every cleaning drone in the academy was under his direct control. 47 autonomous units, each equipped with various cleaning chemicals, mechanical maintenance equipment, and access to every ventilation shaft, service corridor, and hidden passage in the building. Each one now reprogrammed for decidedly less domestic purposes. The thing about being a janitor, Jake said conversationally as he watched the tactical display update on his tablet, showing the real-time positions of every cleaning drone as they began moving through the academy's infrastructure, like antibodies responding to an infection, is that you learn every inch of a building, every vent, every service corridor, every blind spot that the architects never considered because they were thinking about efficiency instead of security. The maintenance drones began their systematic deployment throughout the academy. They carried Jake's improvised explosives, his surveillance equipment, his carefully hoarded collection of military-grade surprises that he'd been accumulating for 2 years while everyone assumed he was just ordering cleaning supplies. You also learn, Jake continued, checking his weapons with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this exact routine before more combat operations than most people could count, that the difference between cleaning supplies and chemical weapons is mostly a matter of concentration and delivery method. Amazing what you can accomplish with a thorough understanding of chemistry, and a complete lack of moral restraint. On his tablet, he could see the mercenary teams consolidating around the archive core. 12 soldiers, professional operators with military-grade equipment, following a solid tactical plan that had probably worked flawlessly on a dozen similar operations. They had done everything right, moved with textbook precision, eliminated resistance with clinical efficiency. They just hadn't counted on the janitor. Ghost actual to all units, Jake said into his earpiece as he began moving toward the archives, his movement now completely different from the shuffle he'd maintained for 2 years. This was the predatory stride of someone who had learned to hunt humans across hostile environments where making noise meant death. In approximately 60 seconds, you're going to hear some very interesting noises coming from the archive sector. When the shooting stops, sweep the building for any remaining hostiles, and someone might want to call the medical teams. There's going to be cleanup required. Wait, came the reply, panic evident in Security Chief Nolteth's voice. You're going in alone, against an entire assault team. That's 12 professional soldiers with military-grade equipment. Jake paused at the archive entrance, listening to the sounds of the mercenaries systematically downloading classified data that could destabilize entire governments. The door was reinforced transparent steel, designed to withstand anything short of orbital bombardment. Security protocols that would take a standard military unit hours to bypass. Jake looked at it for a moment, then pulled out his window cleaner and began spraying the lock mechanism. The military-grade acid ate through the security systems like they were made of cheap plastic. Chief, Jake said as he stepped through the dissolving doorway, alarms beginning to blare throughout the academy as the archive's breach protocols activated. I've been alone for 2 years. This is the first time in a long while that I actually know what I'm doing. The Ghost Battalion hadn't earned its reputation through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had earned it through the kind of tactical thinking that turned every environment into a weapon, every piece of equipment into a tool of war, and every mission into a masterclass in applied lethality. Jake Murphy, humble janitor, was about to remind the galaxy why his former unit had been classified above top secret.
The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet that only comes after violence has run its course. It lasted exactly 47 seconds, which Jake knew, because he'd been counting. Old habits from a life where timing meant the difference between mission success and posthumous medals. Security Chief Nalteth's voice crackled through the comm system, tentative and disbelieving. Ghost actual, status report. Jake emerged from the archive complex, methodically wiping down his hands with a cleaning cloth that was definitely not designed for removing the kind of residue he'd just accumulated. Behind him, the sounds of groaning and the occasional whimper suggested that the unconscious mercenaries were beginning to wake up to some very unpleasant realities about their current situation. 12 hostiles secured, Jake reported with the same tone he might use to describe completing a routine maintenance task. Archive breach contained. Data corruption prevented. Recommend immediate medical attention for the intruders, though I should mention that the paralytic agent I used has some interesting side effects that might make interrogation particularly productive. The responding silence stretched long enough that Jake wondered if his comm system had malfunctioned. Then Chief Nalteth's voice returned, several octaves higher than usual. You, all 12 of them, in under 3 minutes. 2 minutes and 38 seconds actually, Jake corrected, because precision mattered in after-action reports. Though to be fair, I had significant tactical advantages.
Home field knowledge, environmental control, and the element of surprise tend to level playing fields pretty effectively. What Jake didn't mention was the systematic way he'd turned the archive complex into a three-dimensional puzzle box designed to separate, disorient, and neutralize a professional military team. The cleaning drones had done their work with mechanical precision, filling ventilation systems with aerosolized sedatives, creating false walls with rapidly expanding foam, and deploying electromagnetic pulse devices that had turned the mercenaries' advanced equipment into expensive paperweights. By the time Jake had actually entered the complex, half the assault team was already unconscious from breathing recycled air that contained just enough sleep agent to make them drowsy, and the other half was dealing with equipment failures that their training had never prepared them for. The final confrontation had been less of a battle and more of a cleanup operation. 20 minutes later, the Academy's main assembly hall had been converted into an impromptu command center where shell-shocked faculty members tried to process what had just happened to their quiet academic institution. Jake sat in a folding chair that seemed entirely too small for someone who had just single-handedly defeated a professional military assault, still wearing his janitor's uniform, which now sported several new stains that probably wouldn't come out with standard cleaning products. Dean Morthek, who had spent the entire attack hiding in a supply closet, kept staring at Jake like he expected him to vanish in a puff of smoke. "I don't understand," the dean said for the fourth time in 10 minutes. "You're the janitor. You've been cleaning our floors for 2 years. You mop the bathroom facilities." "Still do," Jake replied mildly. "Amazing how consistent bathroom maintenance keeps a building running smoothly. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about an organization by paying attention to their waste management needs." Commander Vextel, whose earlier arrogance had been replaced by the kind of stunned respect usually reserved for natural disasters, leaned forward in his chair. "Ghost Battalion was disbanded 15 years ago after Operation Darkstar. Official records list all members as killed in action or missing, presumed dead." Jake's smile held all the warmth of a neutron star. "Official records say a lot of things, Commander. They also said the Kepler Rebellion would take 5 years and 50,000 troops to resolve. The Ghost Battalion ended it in 6 weeks, with 12 soldiers and a really thorough understanding of applied psychological warfare. But why?" This came from Zara, who had been quietly observing from the corner where she'd stationed herself after delivering the rescued cadets to safety. "Why hide here? Why pretend to be a janitor when you could have any position you wanted in the military?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant in the way of someone looking at memories that existed in places most people never wanted to visit. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experiences that couldn't be shared in polite company. "You know what the problem is with being really good at killing people?" he asked conversationally. "Eventually, someone decides you're too good at it. Too useful, too valuable to ever let go." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the academy grounds where emergency crews were still cleaning up the aftermath of the attack. "The Ghost Battalion was officially disbanded because we had become too effective. We could end conflicts before they started, eliminate threats before they became problems, solve political situations with surgical precision that made diplomats unnecessary." Jake turned back to face the assembled faculty, and for a moment, they saw something in his eyes that made several of them unconsciously lean back in their chairs. "The problem is, when you're that useful, retirement stops being an option. It becomes a threat to people who have gotten comfortable with having the ultimate problem-solving tool at their disposal." Dean Morthek swallowed audibly. "So you died. Officially?" "Absolutely." Jake Murphy, former Ghost Battalion operative, died in a classified operation that never happened in a place that doesn't exist. Jake Murphy, humble janitor who just wants to live quietly and keep things clean, was born the same day. Jake's expression softened slightly. 2 years of mopping floors, fixing broken things, and listening to people complain about problems that don't involve body counts or strategic implications. "It's been the most peaceful 2 years of my adult life." Security Chief Nalteth, who had been reviewing the tactical recordings of Jake's assault on the archive, looked up from his tablet with obvious confusion. "The techniques you used, some of these tactics aren't in any training manual I've ever seen. The way you turned cleaning supplies into military-grade weapons, the drone coordination, the systematic neutralization of superior numbers, that's because we wrote most of those manuals," Jake replied. "The Ghost Battalion didn't just execute operations. We developed the operational methodologies that half the galaxy's military academies now teach as standard procedure.
Asymmetric warfare, environmental exploitation, psychological operations, adaptive tactics. We pioneered most of the concepts that your cadets study in their theoretical classes. Commander Vextel was studying Jake with the expression of someone trying to reconcile two completely incompatible pieces of information. All this time, we've been treating you like a janitor, Jake finished. Which I am. I clean things, I fix things that are broken, and I keep environments functioning smoothly. The only difference is that for 2 years the environment has been an academy instead of a battlefield, and the things that needed fixing were clogged toilets instead of geopolitical crises. Professor Kethran, who had spent considerable effort over the past 2 years treating Jake like he was barely sentient, was now studying him with the kind of academic fascination usually reserved for newly discovered species. The strategic implications of your presence here. Do you realize that some of the galaxy's most promising military minds have been studying tactics that you personally developed? Jake chuckled, and the sound held genuine amusement for the first time since the attack began. Professor, some of my best work has been watching your students make the same tactical errors that got people killed 20 years ago, and not being able to say anything about it, because janitors aren't supposed to understand advanced military theory. Young Zara, who had been absorbing this conversation with the intensity of someone watching her worldview restructure itself in real time, asked the question that was clearly burning in everyone's mind. What happens now? Do you go back to whatever organization you worked for? Jake looked at her for a long moment, then walked back to where he'd left his mop and bucket. They seemed almost absurd now, ordinary cleaning tools that had somehow shared space with weapons that could destabilize governments. He picked up the mop handle, tested its weight, and nodded with satisfaction. The attack on the academy wasn't random, he said, his voice taking on the analytical tone of someone briefing senior military officials. Those mercenaries knew exactly what they were looking for. They had detailed intelligence about your security systems, and they moved with the kind of precision that suggests inside information. Someone wanted the strategic archives badly enough to risk a direct assault on a military academy. Dean Morthek paled. You think there's going to be another attack? I think there are going to be questions about how 12 professional soldiers got neutralized by Academy security, Jake replied. And I think those questions are going to lead to very uncomfortable conversations about information security and institutional vulnerabilities. What I don't think is going to happen is anyone connecting those results to a janitor who was conveniently in the right place at the right time. He looked around the room at the assembled faculty, his gaze settling on each of them in turn. The Ghost Battalion taught me that the most effective operations are the ones that never officially happened. Today, your security forces repelled a coordinated assault through superior tactics and institutional preparation. That's the story that goes in the reports. Security Chief Nalteth nodded slowly. And the janitor? Jake smiled, hefting his mop like he was checking the balance on a familiar weapon. The janitor was probably in a supply closet somewhere, completely oblivious to the excitement. After all, what would a simple human custodian know about military tactics?
3 weeks later, Jake was back to his regular routine of contemplating the philosophical implications of floor maintenance when he noticed the first significant change in his work environment. Commander Vexital, who had previously treated him like a piece of mobile furniture, was now standing at attention whenever Jake entered a room. Good morning, good morning, sir, the reptilian commander said, his scales shifting through several colors that Jake had learned indicated deep psychological confusion. Just Jake is fine, Commander, Jake replied, dunking his mop in the bucket with the same methodical precision he'd used for 2 years. And you can relax, I'm still just the guy who cleans up after people. But Vexital remained at attention, watching Jake work with the kind of fascination usually reserved for watching dangerous predators in their natural habitat. It was, Jake reflected, probably not entirely inaccurate. The second change became apparent when he rounded the corner to find Professor Kethran attempting to empty a waste receptacle. The blue-skinned academic was struggling with the simple mechanics of trash bag replacement, his theoretical approach to the problem creating more complications than solutions. Professor, Jake said mildly. That's my job. Kethran jumped like he'd been shot, nearly dropping the half-filled bag. Oh, Jake. I thought perhaps, that is to say, I wanted to help with the maintenance duties. Show proper respect for the essential work you do here. Jake watched the professor fumble with the bag for another moment before gently taking it from him. I appreciate the gesture, Professor, but there's actually a specific technique to this. You've got to. He demonstrated the proper bag tying method, his hands moving with the same precise efficiency he brought to everything else. See? Proper tension distribution prevents tearing and ensures optimal waste containment. Fascinating, Catherine breathed, watching Jake's demonstration with the intensity of someone studying advanced military tactics. Which Jake supposed wasn't entirely inappropriate given recent revelations. The third change was more subtle but perhaps most significant. The hallways had become quieter when he worked. Not empty, the academy was still a functioning educational institution, but the background chatter of students and faculty had taken on a different quality. Conversations would pause when he approached, not from fear exactly, but from a kind of respectful awareness that hadn't existed before. Young Zara had become his most persistent shadow. She would appear at regular intervals throughout his workday, ostensibly heading to class or study sessions, but always managing to time her routes to coincide with his cleaning schedule. So, she said on a Tuesday morning while Jake was performing routine maintenance on a particularly stubborn floor buffer, "I've been reading about asymmetric warfare tactics in my military history class." "That's nice," Jake replied, not looking up from his work. "Education is important. The textbook mentions something called the Murphy Doctrine for small unit operations in hostile environments. Says it revolutionized Special Forces methodology across 17 different military organizations." Jake's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. "Murphy's a common human name. Could be anyone. It specifically references the Kepler Rebellion." Zara continued with the persistence of someone who had inherited her species' legendary stubbornness. "Says the conflict was resolved through the application of unconventional tactics that turned the enemy's infrastructure against them. Environmental exploitation, they called it." "Interesting historical footnote," Jake said, testing the buffer's rotation mechanism. "But ancient history isn't really my area of expertise. I'm more focused on contemporary floor maintenance challenges." Zara was quiet for a moment, watching him work. "The textbook also says that most of the Murphy Doctrine's specific applications remain classified. Military secret stuff that's apparently too dangerous to teach to regular students." Jake looked up at her then, and his expression was unreadable. "Some knowledge is dangerous, kid. Some experiences change you in ways that can't be unchanged. The galaxy's a safer place when certain capabilities stay theoretical. But what if they're needed again?" she asked. "What if someone like today's attackers comes back, but next time there's no one here who knows how to stop them?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "That's the thing about peace, Zara. It's not a permanent state. It's something you have to choose, every day, over and over again. And sometimes, the people best equipped to protect peace are the ones who understand the true cost of losing it." He stood up, shouldering his equipment with practiced ease. "But hopefully, that's a lesson this generation won't have to learn firsthand." The fourth change was perhaps the most amusing. Dean Morthak had developed what could only be described as a nervous tic whenever Jake entered his vicinity. The dean would straighten his academic robes, clear his throat importantly, and then proceed to treat Jake with the kind of exaggerated courtesy usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. "Jake," the dean called out on a Thursday afternoon, his voice carrying across the main plaza with theatrical projection. "How are you finding the working conditions today? Is there anything, absolutely anything, that the academy can do to improve your work environment?" Jake paused in his window cleaning to consider the question seriously. "Well, Dean, the third-floor bathrooms could use better ventilation, and the cleaning supply budget hasn't kept pace with inflation. Also, whoever's been leaving half-eaten sandwiches in the lecture hall trash bins really needs to learn about proper food disposal." "Consider it done," Morthak declared with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a major policy victory. "I'll have maintenance engineering review the ventilation systems immediately, and I'll personally ensure the cleaning budget receives proper allocation attention. As for the food disposal issue, I'll send a strongly worded memo to all faculty and students about proper waste management protocols." Jake nodded approvingly. "That would be helpful, thank you." As the dean hurried away, Jake noticed Zara watching the interaction with barely concealed amusement. "He's terrified of you," she observed. "He's terrified of what he thinks I represent," Jake corrected. "The idea that someone with my particular skill set was walking around his academy for 2 years without him knowing about it has fundamentally shaken his confidence in institutional security." "And what do you represent?" Jake considered the question while spraying cleaning solution on a particularly stubborn smudge. "I represent the uncomfortable reality that the galaxy is a dangerous place, and sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and chaos is someone willing to get their hands dirty in ways that polite society prefers not to think about." The fifth change was the most subtle but perhaps most meaningful. The academy's entire approach to security had shifted. Not dramatically, Jake had made it clear that overt militarization would defeat the purpose of an educational institution, but systematically.
Guard rotations had been optimized, surveillance coverage had been expanded, emergency protocols had been revised by someone who clearly understood the difference between theoretical preparedness and practical crisis management. The new security procedures are interesting. Security Chief Nalteth mentioned during one of their increasingly frequent conversations. Very thorough, very professional. I might have made a few suggestions, Jake admitted. Nothing major, just some thoughts on improving response times and communication protocols. Some of these suggestions, Nalteth continued, read like they came from a military systems analyst with decades of experience in institutional security design. I've had time to observe the Academy's operations, Jake replied. Amazing what you notice when you're paying attention to how systems actually function instead of how they're supposed to function. The most significant change, however, was one that Jake had been dreading since the attack. It came in the form of a message on his personal communicator, transmitted through channels that officially didn't exist and originating from sources that would deny any knowledge of the communication if asked. The message was brief. Impressive work. We should talk. Old friends miss you. Jake stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Then he picked up his mop and got back to work. That evening, as he was finishing his regular maintenance routine, Jake found himself in the main assembly hall where the post-attack briefing had taken place 3 weeks earlier. The room was empty now, chairs stacked neatly, floors polished to a shine that reflected the overhead lighting like a mirror. He was admiring his handiwork when Zara appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over her shoulder, obviously on her way back from a late study session. "Working late again?" she asked. "Some jobs require attention to detail," Jake replied. "You can't rush quality maintenance work." She walked into the hall, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. "I've been thinking about what you said, about peace being a choice you have to make every day. It's not an easy choice," Jake said, "especially when you know what the alternatives look like. But you made it," she pointed out. "You chose to be a janitor instead of whatever it is that people like you become." Jake smiled, and for once it was entirely genuine. "People like me don't become anything, kid. We just try to find a place where we can do some good without causing too much collateral damage. And this is that place." Jake looked around the assembly hall, thinking about 2 years of quiet routine, of problems that could be solved with cleaning supplies and basic maintenance of students who worried about exam grades instead of survival odds. "Yeah," he said finally. "This is that place." As Zara headed off to her dormitories, Jake finished securing his equipment for the night. Tomorrow would bring the same routine: floors to clean, problems to solve, systems to maintain. The same work he'd been doing for 2 years, performed with the same methodical precision that had once kept him alive in places where precision meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The only difference was that now, when he worked, people watched. They watched with respect, with curiosity, with the kind of awareness that comes from understanding that some jobs require more than they appear to on the surface. Jake Murphy, humble janitor, had found his peace in the simple act of keeping things clean. And if that peace occasionally required the application of skills that most janitors didn't possess, well, that was just part of the job description. After all, someone had to take out the trash.